Good evening, Mr. Krayden, and thank you very much for joining me on the Sami Parvez show. It has been 2 weeks, I believe, and you are back. And unfortunately, is what you were or many Canadians were expecting that it could be a conservative win. It must end the a liberal government like for the fourth term, but unfortunately things did not go in our way. So were you surprised when you heard, like, it was, I believe, 10 o'clock, that mainstream media started projecting it could be a liberal win, either minority or majority?
To be quite frank, I was shocked, really shocked. I didn't head for the nearest window, but I was very disconsolate about the result, and I also didn't think the media should have called the race
You
at 10
bet.
o'clock. And I've heard a lot of reports of people working in the ballot centers saying, why did they call it so early? We hadn't even counted our ballots yet.
Yep.
And I really do think there's a tendency, and I don't want to go on a tangent, but I think there's a tendency when the race is called early based on whatever algorithm or whatever supposition they're making, it affects the outcome
Hmm.
because there's a lot of voters, mindless voters, who will just vote for the winner,
Yeah.
and they'll say, "Oh, liberal victory. I want to vote for the winner." So, did it have an effect? Of course it did. Of course it did. But I was totally shocked. Like as you said, I was predicting a slim conservative majority.
Yep.
I was not expecting a very close liberal majority. They're 3 seats away right now from getting a majority. I hope and pray that that doesn't come to pass. But I honestly think those seven NDP members are going to be the most important members in the House of Commons
Hmm.
because they will, I really believe, become a coalition partner
Hmm.
with Mark Carney and prop this government up for 4 years while the country falls apart around them.
Yep. Yeah, there could be maybe crossing the floor. It could happen. But yeah, you are right. Like the calling, even though I was doing a streaming, like a live as a journalist, I was done. What the heck? How can you do this? Like, it mean all results were not announced. Like, people are still there were some polls were just closed. I think you remember back in 2019 when people in Saskatchewan are lining up in the polling station. So CBC projected, oh, it could be a liberal minority or majority. This is rubbish. Like but they stopped in 2021, but in 2025 again suddenly uh they did it. Like, that was not a good, like, this is not the role of media to do this. And so let's talk about, we know, like, NDP could play a huge role to keeping this government, or keeping Mark Carney as the prime minister maybe for next 4 years. And there are some rumors that there could be some NDP MPs could cross the floor, though it is not expected, but it could happen. But let's talk about conservative. Is a conservative leader Pierre Poulier lost his own seat, which was the most surprising thing, like, happened in this election. Though there were some polls were suggesting, as I think Globe and Mail reported, citing PC insiders poll. They conducted an insider poll that Pierre Poulier could lose his own election, but suddenly they changed. Like, but no other poll, like, was predicting that. Even though 338 Canada was not projecting this thing, it says it could be a tight race, but Pierre Poulier would win his seat. So, what were the mechanism or the consequences that a leader like Pierre Poulier, who was leading 30 points, like, which was the highest lead. If you would see it in January. So what changed? Like, and I need to know, like, who should be blamed? As you did a polling, like that, who should be blamed for conservative laws, whether it's campaign or legacy media or other things.
Well, you've got two of them. I, I, I definitely blame the Poilievre campaign, especially in the first 3 weeks when Poilievre seemed to be listening very intently to the campaign and to his campaign manager, Jenny Byrne. Of course, the two of them go back many, many years. I don't think she should ever have led this campaign. I think she should have retired from politics in 2015 when she
Mhm,
lost Stephen Harper's campaign. But I don't think they were giving him good advice for the first 3 weeks, which was to avoid the media
mhm,
and avoid all media at that time, just rely on rallies, stay away from controversial issues
mhm,
that would be seen as too conservative, and stick to a script and attack Donald Trump. Because in the first 3 weeks, he never talked about change as much as he talked about Donald Trump. I also blame the legacy media, yes, for depicting Pierre Poilievre as some kind of Donald Trump North. I wish he was a Donald Trump North in many ways, but that's not necessarily something most Canadians can accept. And Pierre Poilievre, there was no reason to depict him as a friend of Donald Trump, especially when Donald Trump was saying he's no friend of mine. And it's the irony there of how can you possibly say he's mini Donald Trump and Donald Trump is basically dismissing him. I also blame, speaking of Donald Trump, Donald Trump.
yep.
Donald Trump interfered in this campaign. Now, this is not a popular position from a small C conservative journalist. A lot of people are saying, don't you dare criticize Donald Trump. He had nothing to do with it. Of course he did. He interfered in this campaign 3 times.
Mhm,
And he interfered in the last day of the campaign.
yep.
God only knows why Donald Trump
A liberal government.
wants a liberal government under Mark Carney, because Carney is diametrically opposed in his thinking to everything Donald Trump stands for. The only reason I can think of is this is part of Trump's plan to dismantle Canada and take over what's remaining, what's left over, because nothing makes sense to me about this whole thing. And it's the same way that we have Mark Carney criticizing Donald Trump daily, almost sounding like he wants to go to war with the U.S. And now it's over. As soon as he wins the election, they're best friends.
Yep.
And yeah. So that's where I place the blame.
Yeah, like, even though he sent out a tweet or a social media post on his Truth Social, whatever that is, like, like, you need to consider voting and merging with US, Canada being the 51st state of the United States. I don't buy that. But like, now he's saying he liked or he praised, like, he congratulated Mark Carney, and he said he will be there within a week, or like, in a short period of time. No one knows. But but Pierre Poulier lost his own riding. Like, there could be a like, we can blame these so-called longest ballot committee who, like, just jumped in on that particular riding, and they did it, like they did in the Toronto St. Paul's and Lisa Lemard Wardon, where the incumbent lost. Like, whoever the incumbent party was, the party lost. So, but it seems like it was intentional to attack Pierre Poulier, because they think, like, Pierre Poulier back in, I don't know, like, when he promised, like, back in when he was in university, that there should be a this changing the electoral, there should be a electoral reform, but losing his own seat as the leader. So, what's your take on it?
Well, the only explanation I can have is I think there seems to be some something amiss with the early voting. I'm not suggesting Elections Canada is in any way uh, corrupt. I'm not suggesting it's their fault, but the early voting seemed to be way over in terms of the liberals. But I think what really struck me today when I learned this is that Poilievre's writing was reconstituted.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't understand why he didn't object because there's that old expression about gerrymandering a writing where you format it into a way that the incumbent can't lose so that he's got all of the his potential support in that writing the way it's constituted. This to me was what I call anti-gerrymandering. It's like they took his writing and they took the most liberal part of Canada and put it in his writing. And I don't understand why Poilievre didn't object to this and say, "Hey, this is not going to help me. This is really going to hurt me in the next election, and I don't think this is fair." But this, to me, is one of the chief reasons because why would you have a constituency not vote for the man who potentially was going to be the next prime minister of Canada and at least the official opposition leader? Because that position would have so much more power. Even as opposition leader, Poilievre has much more power than a backbench liberal. So
Mm-hmm.
I find this whole thing very suspicious, and I think there has been it's by design. He was meant to fail. I also think Poilievre needed to be out more on the hustings. I have to place some blame on Poilievre's team. I don't think Poilievre. I know he was running across the country campaigning. He can't be blamed for not being out every day door knocking or whatever or phoning. But apparently his campaign team didn't do much for him either. And you can never take a seat for granted, even after 21 years. And I
Yep.
remember Pierre Poilievre winning that riding in 2004. And a lot of people didn't think he could do it because he was labeled a parachute candidate because he was brought in he came here from Calgary just to run in that seat. And he overcame all those obstacles to win and he's been doing it ever since. I really think he didn't put as much energy into the election in his writing as he
Yep.
should have because he took it for granted
Mm-hmm.
and he thought, how can I lose
Yep.
after 21 years? And that's a bad attitude to have because a politician can lose any election. You've always got to look after your writing, even if you're the opposition leader or the prime minister.
Yep. Yeah, you are absolutely right. He takes it granted. It seems like he was more overconfident, and also like his campaign team. Like I don't know, like what happened is in the last week, they said they are putting more resources in Pierre Poulier riding. I think someone tweeted. I read. I don't know, like it is true or not, but he said that there were not much like signs on the road, but like what is for Pierre Pouliot from now on? Like, do you think is he going to resign or he will stay on? Like what we saw, like last two leaders, Andrew Scheer and Aaron O'Toole, both resigned after losing the election. Should we expect the same thing for Pierre Pouliot?
No, absolutely not. Pierre Poilievre is not in the same mold as Aaron O'Toole. Aaron O'Toole really, uh, I don't think had the constitution to face defeat. I think Andrew Scheer wanted to leave after losing that election. Pierre Poilievre strongly believes in himself and in his message, and I think he'll be back again. And I don't think there's any movement to replace him because replace him with whom?
Mhm.
Because we saw during the last leadership campaign who came forth. Uh, Nobody of value, and I can't think of anybody in the conservative caucus at the moment, anyway, who who could replace him,
Mhm.
and who is a relatively strong conservative and has has the viability to win. He's because he came close to winning. It's like if he had another week or two, I think he could have turned the corner. But he didn't have that week or two. It was over. And but I think he could make it the next time. My fear, Sammy, is that we're not going to have a next time. It's That's what I'm worried about. If this is a 4 year
mhm,
Carney government, I think it's going to be catastrophic for Canada, and I do think Alberta will separate. If this is a minority government that collapses in 6 months, there's hope. And I think Poilievre will win the next election and basically save Canada from total disintegration. But who knows what's going to happen? It's difficult, very difficult to read the political tea leaves right now because we live in very, very strange times. This whole
yep,
election was bizarre, and with the interaction between Carney and Trump, and how Trump basically became the only issue in the campaign,
mhm,
even after 10 years of devastating liberal government. Bizarre campaign. I think the consequences could be just as bizarre. It's almost like a day-to-day basis right now. I mean, I'm doing a show tomorrow on Alberta separatism because it's growing leaps and bounds at the moment, and it's only going to get worse if it looks like a 4 year Carney government. And we'll know that in a relatively short period of time. And if it's going to be a 4 year Carney government, I cannot see the country surviving at this point as it is today.
mhm. Yeah, it is shocking to hear your predictions and what we are seeing. Realizing what happened, like particularly back in 2019 when a liberal got re-elected, there was exit alienation which were calmed down like for a little while, but it seems like they are getting more oppressed. But right now we are seeing like in Alberta legislation, Daniel Smith is also relaxing those rules and regulation for a referendum or recalling an elected official. So is like Danielle Smith, despite she's saying that she would stay within Confederation, but in inside, she's trying to give the opportunity to Albertan to decide whether you want to stay or you want to leave. Like right now the it means the legislations are more tough to reach a higher threshold. Then now she's reducing it. I think it could reduce by 10%.
Yeah, no Alberta premier at this point is going to stand up and say I'm going to support Alberta separatism, an independent Alberta. What's going to happen in 2 months' time, 3 months' time, if it looks like net zero policies are going to persist and, in fact, get worse? And with the pronouncement by Quebec that there will be no pipeline allowed through that province, it will put Alberta in an impossible position. And I think it will give any Alberta premier, and it's going to be Premier Daniel Smith, the opportunity to say that we need a new confederation, or Alberta will go it alone. And I don't think if the desire to separate surpasses 55%, I cannot see her saying I'm going down with the ship. And I don't know what her personal preference is. I mean, she's saying she's totally for Canada, for Confederation, and she probably is. But if you've ever been to Alberta, you know that the sense of injustice, the sense that the province is being abused by the rest of the country is very strong.
Yep.
And if that persists and it in fact is reinforced by further policies from Mark Carney that are detrimental to Alberta, I can certainly see her changing her public opinion on that.
Mhm. But right now we saw like in Quebec, like separatist party like Bloc Québécois, Blanchet party, like they lost their like seats count. Like I think they dropped to like 22 or 23. At one point in the polls in the past, they were up like being the official opposition, but things got changed. And so right now it seems like Quebecers are more within confederation rather than being a separate state as they were in the past. Like there were two referendum which were very close. And do you think like things would go the same way in Alberta? And we know like there would be an election next year, for which like what Danielle Simmet is doing now, which could for what she could pay the price.
Are you talking about if Quebec is going to go
No,
the same
like
way as Alberta?
yeah, like Quebecer, like Quebecers right now, Bloc Québécois supports dropped, right?
Yeah,
And right now the movement is going in Alberta for the separatist, as you said, like you are going to do a show tomorrow on Alberta independence. But what Daniel Smith is relaxing those rules for a referendum, calling a
yeah.
referendum and getting enough signature, there could be a Alberta independent state. So if nothing happen at this point until the next election in Alberta election, like there would be a provincial election next year. So don't you think these things would uh, pay, like Daniel Smith could pay the price in the polls?
Well, you have to remember the Bloc can do nothing about Quebec independence. They merely steal taxpayers' money by sitting in the House of Commons and supporting nothing but Quebec. But they have no mechanism or no ability to actually institute any kind of Quebec separation. They can't even start a referendum because they're a federal party. That's up
Yeah.
to the Parti Québécois to do that. And I can see the support for the Parti Québécois rising at this point.
Mm,
But if you're saying if things get better in the next year under Mark Carney, well, I there's a very good chance that the fires of separatism in Alberta will subside. But for that to happen, Mark Carney would have to be a completely different person than he's been an entire life. And if he has some sort of Damascus Road experience uh, on the way to uh, Parliament Hill, well, I guess that's possible, but I find it hard to believe. This is a hardened globalist, the same way we speak about hardened criminals. He's a hardened globalist who is only interested in advancing globalist policies and Mark Carney wealth. That's been his whole life. So I don't think he's going to be good for Canada, and I think he's going to be horrible for Alberta. And I think that's what's going to happen in the next 6 months to a year. Like I said, if this government collapses, I think so will separatism in Alberta. But that's going to have to happen within the next 6 months, or perhaps maybe at the most 8 months, and that will mean a new election and the hope that things will change under a pure Poilievre government. I think Alberta could wait for that, but they're not going to wait 4 years.
mm-hmm. Yeah, like so let's get back to conservative leader Pierre Poulier. Pierre Poulier like mocked, criticized Doug Ford like a conservative. So though we say like he's not a conservative premier, but he belongs to like PC, and also he took a fight with Tim Austin,
Yeah.
Nova Scotia premier. Like our like campaign manager like emailed, I think, or called like Tim Austin uh, campaign team, like when we get elected, so we are not going to help you, like, but taking fights with the premiers. So don't you think it was a very bad decision what we are seeing right now? This, so do you think like these things costed Pierre Poulier this election?
I'm not sure Doug Ford really cost Pierre Poilievre anything. And for Poilievre to support Doug Ford, it would have very much angered a lot of his conservative base who really despised Doug Ford as a phony liberal, as a red Tory. So I don't think he made a mistake in not doing that, and it was calculated. And the same with Tim Houston, who's another red Tory, he's got some very murky policies concerning net zero in place. So I no, I don't think he made a mistake. I think it was if Doug Ford had have rallied around Pierre Poilievre, I don't think it really would have made much of a difference to the campaign. But if Pierre Poilievre had rallied to Doug Ford, I think it would have made a negative impact on Poilievre's campaign.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. So Jagmeet Singh done. Like after after getting his pension, so now he said he's resigning, and now he will move on. Like despite like and destroying NDP party. So is there anything for NDP anymore, or it could take decades now to build it up? Is it built up by a great Canadian leader, Jake Layton?
I think it's on a downward spiral, and it's interesting if you look at the last three elections, the NDP has given a lot more of its support to the conservatives and the liberals. This is not what you're hearing in the mainstream media. They're
Mm-hmm.
suggesting, oh, the bleeding support from the NDP is going to the liberals. It did not go to the liberals in this election. If you look at key ridings where conservatives won this time and hadn't in the past because an NDP candidate won, the support went to the conservatives, not the liberals. And that's because Poilievre reached out to organized labor. He was endorsed by 10 union. He addressed several events for blue collar workers. He was all there. He was there for the trades, and I think that was a very smart move. And the support that the NDP used to have went to the conservatives. And I think that's going to be a trend, unless you can never say never in any in politics, because I mean the Liberal Party was almost defunct. When Justin Trudeau took it over, it was basically a almost forgotten. The official opposition was the NDP at that time. But I can see the NDP, especially with the new uh, strategic direction from the conservatives to attract more common sense blue collar workers. I think the NDP is finished, and we won't see much more of them in the future. I think Jagmeet Singh destroyed that party. I think that's what it really came down to, and
Mm-hmm.
that's Jagmeet Singh's legacy: is I destroyed the Democratic Party. The Khalistani kid, he
Yeah.
destroyed that party, and it was an absolute disgrace to watch that man, and an absolute joy to watch him defeated and come in third.
Yeah, yeah, that was most like embarrassing for him, but he takes it pride. But let's talk like continue talking about NDP.
Yeah.
So who do you think like would take over NDP, or do you really believe Wap Kinu, like Manitoba Premier, could step down and take over NDP?
Hmm. I think that would be a hard decision for him to make because he's a popular premier and there's no future in the NDP.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they've got anybody in the hustings who would want to take the job over. And I can't and most of their key figures either were defeated or didn't run again. So I don't know. Like I don't know. I would have thought someone like Nikki Ashton would have been a viable candidate because she's more of a centrist in the party,
Hmm.
but she
Lost.
lost her seat, and I can't think of anybody who would want to replace. I can think of many people who could replace him, but I don't can't think of anybody who would want to replace him at this point because you're in a very tenuous position. The liberals would have to really sweeten the pot. Let's put it this way: if Mark Carney says, okay, all seven of you guys are going to be in cabinet, or or the leader of the NDP is going to be in the cabinet, and three others or two other members will be in the cabinet, then you might attract people like the premier of Manitoba. But that's the only way. And God only knows. Mark Carney might go that far because he could see it as a means of further bothering the ND or the conservatives. So that's the only way I can see that. But that would be a true coalition government, not what Jagmeet Singh had, which was we're going to support you and still pretend we're opposing you, which was a very bizarre situation. You would have to have a true coalition between the Liberals and the NDP. Then that would sweeten the pot. But but then again, people would say, well, what's going to happen in the next election? I'll be there 4 years and destroyed in 4 years' time, because that's exactly what would happen.
Mhm.
So if somebody's looking for a 4-year job as a member of the Liberal government, then that might be a possibility. But that's the only way I can see getting quality. And I hesitate to use that word when applied to socialists, but getting quality candidates, you're really going to have to sweeten the pot for them.
Mhm. Yeah. So, like, is there like PPC, like now Maxime Bernier is blaming Pierre Poilievre that they could not defeat liberals, like, despite he said, oh, we did not run enough like candidate or whatever he said that, like, but his party just received 0.7% votes. Do you think like PPC is still deserve to be a party in federal level?
Well, it's hard for me to say this because I have a lot of friends in the PPC, and I like Maxime Bernier. I have a lot of respect for Maxime Bernier, but I think at a certain point you have to throw you have to close the door and
Yep.
say this is not feasible at this time, because it hasn't been, and their numbers haven't improved. If they had picked up a seat or two, I would have said, there's
Yep.
hope for these solid small c conservative libertarians. But there was absolutely no movement. At the same time, there wasn't really, they didn't really cause any conservative candidates to lose. The vote
Yep.
splitting wasn't that high.
Mhm.
However, when you fail to achieve, even 2% of the vote in any election, or elect an MP for what, the third or fourth election now, or third election,
Yep.
I really think it's time to move on, because this is not the time in history to do this. And if it comes down to the conservatives or chaos, if it comes down to we have a conservative government or the country falls apart, I think we're going to have to say, okay, it's time for the PPC to put their swords down and to join with the conservatives, because it would be this is history. This is either saving or losing the country. And I think that's what it would come down to.
Mhm. Yeah. So we know like UK election was held on July 4th, 2024, and Parliament convened on July 9th. But our election was held on April 28th, and Parliament will resume on May 26th. It is a gap of almost a month. So we have the same Western parliamentary system. So why our elected officials are very like lazy, I would say, that reconvene the parliament and get back to work. Like Canadians are suffering. We have tariffs. We have a crisis. We have a unity problem. But they don't give a damn about these things. I would say that, like I feel it as a Canadian, as a taxpayer, but they are not going, like they will sit there. I was checking today, like parliament website. It says they will sit for 20 days, then they will get another like 3 months break, then they will come back. Total they will sit just for 73 days. This is nonsense. So I need to ask you, like we have the same parliamentarian system, same Western parliamentary system here in Canada. So what is the difference? Why we are not very active to do our job properly?
Well, here, completely agree with you.
Thank you.
We have the laziest politicians in the Western world, probably the laziest politicians in any democracy. They get more time off than any other democratic country. And it's abominable. And as you say, we're supposed to be in a crisis right now, right? They've been
Yep.
talking about a crisis that we need to prepare for war.
Yep.
And yet they're not prepared to go back to the House of Commons for anything. And they weren't prepared to go back to the House of Commons when it was prorogued,
Yep.
and the crisis was going full blazes at that time. But they weren't prepared to go back. The government wasn't prepared to go back, and as we've said before, they get an annual pay raise that they all agree on, and why should they be sitting around for 30 days? It's absolutely ludicrous. And you talk about the UK, yeah, they got right back to work. And if you look at the Americans, they don't get 5 breaks a week or five
Yep.
breaks a year, sorry.
Weird. Yeah.
And they don't get the summer off.
Yep.
They don't get an extended Christmas break. Sometimes they're there till December 24th,
Yep.
and they're back again in January. And people in the Congress, in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, they work twice as hard as our elected officials. And this is why I look at it sometimes, and I'm saying it is absolutely ridiculous. Are these people serious about anything they say? Now, certainly, Mark Carney's not serious about anything he says, because 3 days ago it was war with the United States, and now he and Donald Trump are best buddies. So they're not serious about anything. And I think it at times crosses party lines. I don't know how serious any of these people are. And as you know, I worked for 8 years on Parliament Hill, and I was often shocked at the fact that these people just didn't want to work. And they always thought they were entitled to lots of time off that the average Canadian can only dream of.
Mhm.
And who else gets an annual raise? Uh, and it's a sense of entitlement, and you're right. And I don't know if that's ever going to stop. And I think that's probably one of the things that's leading to the dissolution of this country.
Yeah, it is shocking. Like day before yesterday, I asked my manager for a day off. He said, "No, you cannot do it. Can you do some hours work?" I said, "I have just 1 hour like appointment. Okay, I'm going to work. It mean, but I lost my 4 hours. But as average Canadians, like like if they don't go to work, so they don't earn money. But our elected official, they make money whether they are sitting their houses or in the parliament house. And our parliament is being prorogued since January 6th, and it has not been working like for almost like since I think 2024 due to this there were some scandals. I asked like Brian Fesifume, Toronto Sun, a national political reporter, about these pay raises you mentioned. We always talk about these things. He said that I said, why a reporter don't ask about this pay raise? He said they made us busy, like there are too many things to cover, so we cannot come to question about pay raise. And they are going to, they got their raise like last April 1st, and they are going to get another raise, and there is no talk about it all. And also, like, I don't know like where Carney would stand on his cabinet size. Is he appointed, I think, 23 cabinet when he got elected as the liberal leader. Now where would he stand, like, is getting big as elected official? So do you think he would keep the same number of cabinet, or he would change the numbers to make
No,
it?
I think he's going to increase the size of cabinet. I believe the small cabinet or smaller cabinet he had was entirely due to the coming election, to appear like he was fiscally responsible, almost a small c conservative, wanted smaller government. He was definitely trying to steal the win from the conservatives. And that was one of the first things he did. And as well as lowering, not canceling, but lowering the consumer carbon tax. It's still on the books, and it could be reactivated anytime. All it requires is just to change the amount. Right now it's at zero. It could go back to 60 cents at any time if Mark Carney decides so. But we'll see what happens when the House is sitting. If he repeals the carbon tax, the consumer carbon tax on day one, then I would think he might be serious about not reinstituting it. But I doubt he's going to do that. And yeah, I think the cabinet will expand again. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so should we expect a gender balance cabinet, a diverse cabinet, or he would bring the most qualified folks on the front or on the front benches?
Yeah, I don't know how many qualified people they can find in that caucus, but it. I don't think he's going to replicate the gender parity of 50-50 male female that Justin Trudeau did. I mean, that's just foolishness. I and I mean he'll any cabinet today has to reflect the diversity of Canada. That won't change. It's certainly not going to all be white men
Mhm.
or white men and women.
Yeah.
But I do think it's going to be a larger cabinet.
Mhm. Yeah, and also like who would be the speaker? Do you think Greg Fergus would remain the speaker, or as Elizabeth May, she's going to run for the speaker? Do Are we going to have a very qualified speaker like what there was in the UK? Like I don't remember his name, but he served for a long term. I think almost for more than a decade from 2003 9 or until I think 2020 before Brexit, like they completed their agreement before that date. He resigned. I forgot his name, but he was a conservative. He got elected without uh, without any opponent. So like it means he scolded like a conservative prime minister or whoever the person was speaking on the floor. Should we expect a speaker like him?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because you realize the Green Party did not run in 100 ridings so they could help the Liberals. And I mean this is such a excuse for a political party to begin with. But for Elizabeth May as Speaker, I mean that is beyond comprehension. And I won't be too much more specific about why, but I think there are certain days she just can't find her way to work. And I don't believe that she would be elected as Speaker. But Fergus, would
Yeah.
he come back? Well, he wasn't there that long. But at the same time, I really think he's so tarnished with the Trudeau years
Mhm.
and with being so tied to Justin Trudeau. He was his parliamentary secretary for goodness sake. And Trudeau really wanted Fergus to be the speaker. So I don't think Fergus is it either. I mean, there certainly are more qualified people in the House of Commons than either of these people. And Elizabeth May might get 15 votes if she gets that. Probably from the NDP and the most radical leftist in the Liberal caucus. I don't. She wouldn't have a hope in hell of winning that race. So it's going to be It's going to be somebody else other than Greg Fergus or Elizabeth May.
Yep. Yeah, that UK speaker I was talking about, that is John Barco. He served from
Ah,
2009 until 2019. I loved like to airing him whenever there was a question period. But we need a speaker like him. Like a speaker should always remain impartial and neutral when sitting in the chamber. Okay, so. So as we talk, like I think that as you mentioned earlier about the gas prices, they are going up. Like right now, I think it is more than 130 cent per liter. I don't know like what's going on. I think there are some other taxes. What I was reading of a report of Toronto Sun by Joe Warrington. I don't
yeah.
exactly recall those wording, but it mean it is something there would be more increase of 20 cents more about that. And though like so at that time like he signed a documents or something like that to revoke this carbon tax. So that is over how it works.
Well, I have to ask my good friend Dan McTeague why the price of gas is going up. That's his. He's an expert on that. But the the thing is, the whether it's the consumer or a corporate carbon tax, the price of gas is going to remain high. And right now, this might just be fluctuations in the market.
Mhm.
But the point is, there's always going to be fluctuations in the market, and any kind of carbon tax is going to add to the price of a liter of gas.
Mhm. Yeah, like so right now they change, like Mark Carney said that we need to reduce the immigration, like we need to put a cap on it, and Pierre Poulier is own policies. But do you think like he would stick on his words on the immigration, as you mentioned, like he served in the UN and um World Economic Forum and anywhere, like those organization always push to bring more immigration. Do you think he would stick on his words to caping the immigration, or he would open it again like what Trudeau did?
I think he's going to open it again like Trudeau did. I don't believe a word of what Mark Carney said during this campaign any more than I believe he was fighting with Donald Trump. The whole thing was a facade, a charade. He was acting, and he was stealing policies from Pierre Poilievre to look
Yep.
like he was a middle of the road liberal. He tried very hard to look that way. But at certain times, certain days, he revealed who Mark Carney really is. And people really don't change politically overnight like this. It's very, very unusual for people to radically change their policies, especially in a country like Canada, where it's not intrinsically conservative. And I was listening one podcaster today say, Canada is a lot like Vermont, and it's you can't really impose a lot of conservatism on this country at one time. So I don't think Mark Carney is going to change who Mark Carney is, which is a globalist. And what I really worry about Mark Carney is that he's going to do everything in his power as prime minister to advance Mark Carney and his globalist friends to make more money. And by using the system, by abusing the system, by making it so that he and his friends can make money off of it. And I think there's just such a conflict of interest with Mark Carney. And to get back to, why did the conservatives lose? They should have been every day talking about the stuff that we've been talking about Mark Carney uh, in the pocket of China, Mark Carney advocating the virtual end of the US dollar. Mark Carney is the Brookfield asset manager evading taxes. Mark Carney is the guy who, as a chairman of Brookfield, had no problem with abusing people in the third world, buying pipelines, and financing fossil fuels, and denying those very things to Canadians. That's the real Mark Carney, because those things make money for Mark Carney. And this is a guy who is embedded with the globalist elite. And he's 60 years old. He ain't going to change anytime soon. It's worked for him. I still want to find out how much money this guy is worth. There's estimates that he's worth up to $500 million.
Wow.
And this is why he did not want to talk about his finances, because they're so intricate and they're so connected to a lot of very strange people and strange companies around the world. And I would have been nothing but an embarrassment. But I do think, the conservatives did not expose Mark Carney to the degree he needed to be exposed. They let
Mhm.
him get away with this charade of I am going to fight Donald Trump, or I'm not too far from Poilievre on these fiscal issues. The only thing that separates us is, well, I don't know what was supposed to separate them during that campaign, because he didn't talk about some of the things he's going to do, such as the home equity tax, which is going to be catastrophic for the boomers who voted for him. Those
Mhm.
are the ones who are going to be most affected by the home equity tax. Poilievre said he would never do it. Carney refused to commit to not doing it, which means he will do it.
Mhm. Yep. And like you brought up China, I need to ask you, do you think was there any interference in this election is like there were in 2019, 2021.
Well, of course there was. We knew that in Toronto. There was already there was evidence of China was interfering in the Greater Toronto area again. So I don't doubt for a minute that China was again interfering in this election, and they seem to like the liberals the best, and those are the people they're electing. They want to go pick up and deport uh, conservative candidates, but I don't doubt for a minute there was Chinese interference in this election.
Mhm. Yeah, and so so just last final thought. So what in the past also there was like early polling days, advanced polling, like as there are like last few elections. So in the past also this system was there, like advanced polling.
Yes, there's been advanced voting for a couple of elections back. I think I'm hearing a lot of stories about irregularities
Mhm.
at the advance voting areas, and I think it has to be carefully monitored because the potential for abuse is quite high because it's so far away from election day, and the transportation of these ballots
Mhm.
seems to be a real issue with a lot of people right now. So I think it potentially is subject to abuse.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Krayden, again. So what's your David last thought on this show? So before we end.
I think Canada is headed for crisis. I don't think there's been a time in our history where we have been in more crisis internally. I think we were probably in more crisis externally in the Second World War, but I don't think there's ever been a time when the country's been more in danger of falling apart. And I think the likelihood of that is extremely high, given the possibility of this Carney government becoming a coalition effective majority government. And that's it's going to be a rough ride for the next 6 months, a very rough ride. And I'll be watching along with you to see how this country adapts and or whether this country falls apart.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, David, once again for joining me on the Sami Parvez show. Looking forward to seeing you again on the next video. Until then, please take a good care of yourself.
Thank you so much, Sammy. We'll be back again.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, sir.